Welcome to Betrayal Trauma Recovery, BTR.org. I'm Anne. I'm sure you remember what it was like when you were searching for help, maybe for your husband, hoping to find the right program or therapist. That's why I started podcasting. I supported my husband through 7 years of pornography addiction recovery, and not one therapist during that time told me I was experiencing emotional and psychological abuse and sexual coercion. I didn't want any other woman on the planet to be in the dark. If you're like the majority of my listeners, you're experiencing the type of abuse that's invisible and difficult to wrap your head around. Your husband is using porn or having affairs or lying to you, and you're getting the same bad advice about how to improve communication or your relationship. If you need support from women who totally understand, check out our daily group session schedule at btr.org/group. We'd love to see you in a session today. One simple, anonymous way to help spread the word is to click, follow, or subscribe to the Betrayal Trauma Recovery podcast on your favorite podcasting app. While you're there, every 5-star rating helps make this podcast more visible and will help save other women from getting the wrong kind of help, like a couple program that will make this type of abuse worse. For those of you who follow or subscribe to this podcast, thank you so much. Your support means so much to me. We have a member of our community on today's podcast. Her name is Tracy, and she is a passionate advocate for betrayed wives. Discovering her husband's addiction set her on a course of education about betrayal trauma, abuse, spirituality, and healing. Tracy is a devoted mother to 4 children, a compassionate friend, and an avid runner, and mountains and lakes are her happy place. Mountains and lakes are also my happy place, so we have that in common. We're going to start by talking about spiritual bypass. I think the main issue is that spiritual bypass can be used by abusers or clergy or even therapists to build up abusers and keep victims trapped.
Absolutely. Okay, wow, you're jumping right into the meat of things. This is such a complex topic. It can definitely play out that way.
I'm really interested in learning how spiritual concepts can be used to abuse women. We'll get to that a little later, but before we get to that, how can understanding the concept of spiritual bypass help those seeking to heal from trauma?
I'll just give an example for myself. So my first D-Day was a month after I was married. It was very traumatic. Very, very traumatic. I didn't know that I was in trauma. I didn't know anything about trauma. There was so much I didn't know. I didn't have any support system or any real education. So basically, all I knew was that I was in so much pain and in such a place of darkness that the only way out, and it took me 2 or 3 days, I don't remember, 2 or 3 days of being in this dark, dark pit before I realized that the only way out was God. And so I went to God in prayer and said, I cannot keep feeling this. I felt like it was going to kill me. So I said, I can't keep feeling this. I need to forgive my husband. I said, I don't know how to forgive him. I said, I am incapable of forgiving him, but I want to forgive him. And I know you can help me. And it was incredible. I mean, it worked. Immediately, the darkness just lifted and I was filled with incredible comfort and warmth and peace. Now, I was not healed from trauma. Of course, I didn't understand trauma or what it meant to thoroughly heal from trauma.
My guess is this was just the first time that you experienced sort of a knowledge that you were in the abuse cycle, but you found out more later. The other thing you didn't know at the time was that your husband was abusive. And so this to you felt like a miracle that you could move forward and quote unquote forgive, but you didn't realize that you not only hadn't healed from trauma, but you also didn't realize that you were not safe.
Right. Here's where spiritual bypass can get tricky, because while that worked for me at that time and helped me, ultimately it kept me stuck in the trauma. It didn't help me to better understand it or to come to a better understanding of my situation.
Okay, that's very interesting. I can think of a lot of examples of spiritual bypass. Something like, I'm going to let Jesus solve this problem, and ta-da, it's solved. Or other ways in which I'm going to turn to God, mistaking that moment of feeling peace, which is a really good thing. Like, you needed to feel peace and he gave you the gift of peace in that moment, but mistaking a moment of peace for the solution.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to compare now to my second D-Day, which was 15 years into marriage. I had very little idea that anything was going on in between. I did have one small D-Day a year after the first one, so about a year into marriage. But again, I still did not really realize what was going on. About 15 years in, I found out that this had been going on my entire marriage on a very regular basis, and that obviously my husband had been lying to me constantly about it and hiding. And all those pieces start to fit together. Oh, that explains so much of my experience in this marriage that I did not understand. So the second one was incredibly traumatic. So that happened on a Sunday night. I still remember it. Late at night, we were in bed talking. And as he started to disclose just the reality, my situation started to descend upon me. As I was coming to terms with that, I didn't sleep that night. I think I fell asleep at 6 a.m. and slept for 1 hour. And I said, I will not do this again, because I realized even though I'd really only been through, as far as I knew, one big cycle of this, I could see in that moment handling it the way I did the first time wasn't going to cut it. All that was going to do was set me up for more D-Days and more D-Days and more D-Days.
The other thing at the time, I'm guessing that you did not take into account was that those 15 years you were being psychologically abused continually. So you're not just saying, I'm not going to stand for one more D-Day.
Right. Absolutely. And I had no idea what spiritual bypass was at that point. I didn't even stumble upon this concept until a year after that second D-Day. But this is just something that, like, I just knew inherently in that moment, like that moment of truth, right? And so my whole approach to healing was different than that first time. Like, this was not going to be an event or an arrival. This was going to be a long process. I was going to let myself feel angry for as long as I needed to feel angry. I started setting boundaries just right away without even knowing what a boundary was, never having been introduced to the concept. It was just something that I knew. The lesson that I learned that was actually good and true from the first experience was that God is real. So it actually did, not for me in the context of my relationship, help me, but it did help me personally in strengthening my relationship with God. So there was good and truth that came out of that first experience for me personally.
Let's talk about that for a minute. You did not feel betrayed by God then? You didn't look back and say, oh, he gave me the sense of peace. He gave me the ability to forgive, and that did me wrong.
You know, it's interesting because I felt more betrayed by God after the first D-Day than the second one. I don't know what it was, but something after that second D-Day, I just instinctively knew some truths right away. And one of them was that this isn't God. God did not betray me here. My husband did. And I realized just a lot of things just started fitting into place very quickly. One of those was God was there for me all along. He was warning me. After that first D-Day, I would pray for discernment. Oh, I would pray to know if my husband was being honest with me or if he was lying to me. And I always thought that since I could never find evidence or my husband would never admit anything to me, I guess that meant he was telling me the truth because God wasn't putting something in my lap, right? Like throwing the evidence out in front of me. But in reality, I felt that uneasiness. I knew in my gut that something was wrong for years. And I knew after that second D-Day, God was talking to me all along. It's not God's fault. It's my husband's fault. It was like realizing what gaslighting was. And again, before I understood what gaslighting was, my husband was interfering with my relationship with God.
That's super cool because that's exactly what happens. It's an abusive situation where over and over again, someone is on purpose manipulating your reality to inhibit your relationship with God on purpose.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what it did. I was actually a very spiritual person before I got married. I came to my spirituality like as a kid and strengthened it as a youth. And that was always a strong point for me. And it was very strange for me that after I got married, my spirituality started to decline. And I started to feel more distant from God. And it was really weird to me because I couldn't figure out why. Because I was doing all of the same things I'd always done. My heart was turned towards God. I was wanting that relationship, but I couldn't figure out why I was feeling so distant. And so I would come up with reasons. Well, maybe it's because I've had kids now and I don't have the time to pray the same way that I used to. I don't have the time to spend as much time in the scriptures as I used to. So I guess I'm not prioritizing right because motherhood is difficult, but that wasn't the reason.
That's fascinating. I had that same thing happen. I've considered myself before I got married. And then after I got married, it was so difficult to feel that. And I've never thought about it in this context before. Is that one of the reasons you felt really betrayed the first time, was because you had maybe prayed about, should I marry him? And you got an answer, yes. And then you thought, what? Why would you tell me to marry this guy? Or talk about why you felt really betrayed by God the first time.
Yes and no. So I didn't actually get the answer yes. What happened was I was careful and cautious about getting married. I didn't want to just make a rash decision. I was very prayerful about it. I studied the subject, and ultimately I decided, okay, I love this guy. I've got to take a leap of faith, step into the darkness. So, I said yes. Well, I started to feel uneasy during our engagement, like something was off. And it's really interesting because there were a variety of different things that happened in a relatively short period of time during our engagement that really moved me to confront my husband and ask if he had ever had any issues with pornography. And he looked me in the eye and he said, no, never. And I may have asked one follow-up question. He maintained, no, never. I didn't push it. I just accepted his answer. But I still had these feelings of just uneasiness. My best friend at the time was also engaged. She also was feeling kind of uneasy. We were like, is this normal? Is this just like engagement jitters? But we didn't want to be like that crazy girl who like gives back the ring, right? And changes her mind and goes back and forth. And so we made a pact with each other, me and my friend, that if we started to feel that uneasiness, that we wouldn't act on it unless it stayed with us for more than 24 hours. Because, it might just come and go or whatever, just the butterflies. And actually, I also prayed about that. And I said to God, I understand that this might be normal, like just normal feelings of anxiety or whatever. And so I'm not going to take them seriously unless they stay with me for more than 24 hours. And then I hope that means that this is serious. At one point, they did stay with me more than that length of time. But still, I didn't really have any reason of why something should be off. I didn't have anything to point to. So I went to my dad, who I love and is a wonderful, wonderful man, full of lots of goodness and wisdom. But he basically just talked me out of my feelings. He basically convinced me that I was just being silly and too emotional. He said, your fiancé is a great guy. He's got great career ambitions. He's going to be able to take good care of you. He loves you. There's no reason not to marry him. After I found out a month into marriage, which the way I found out is because my husband lost his job because he was caught using it at work. It was pretty awful. But I did briefly, just very briefly, feel betrayed by God. I was like, I prayed about this. I asked about this. But again, through bypass, I kind of just let go of all of those feelings. Well, after my second D-Day, 15 years in, when I was trying to put all the pieces back together and make sense of it, I realized God was answering my prayer. I knew in my gut that something was off. No, he didn't tell me exactly what, but I knew that something was off. I can trust my gut. I can trust God. I realized my husband is the one who lied to me. My dad is the one who talked me out of my feelings when I went to him saying, I feel like something is off. I'm nervous. I've never had to work through a really intense or long-lasting feeling of betrayal by God. I've been able to realize that, no, he's been with me. It's people getting in the way.
I think that's a really good way to look at it. I hope that women can get to that point and realize that, but it's very, very difficult, especially if they haven't had some of those experiences where they do feel like a prayer was answered and maybe they ignored it. But I think that's good to bring up. Thank you for sharing that part.
I want to add one quick thing I would encourage women to consider is that sometimes we may get an answer, right? Maybe this was not my experience. I did not get a definitive, yes, marry this guy. That was not my experience. But some women I have talked to say they have had that experience. And so they feel very betrayed when they find out. And that's totally understandable. What I would encourage them to think about is, what did that yes actually mean? Like sometimes we can get an answer to something, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily the answer for the rest of our lives. Things can change. people can still make choices that change circumstances. I like to think about life as not something that's totally planned out where God is like pulling these puppet strings, but rather there's those books that I had as a kid. I forget what they're called. Like change your ending books. I don't know if you ever had any of those, but you would start to read the story and then there was a choice that you would have to make. And then depending on that choice, you would skip ahead to a certain point in the book, and then you'd come to another choice. So depending on the choices that were being made, the ending of the story would change. Things would play out. And so I think it's helpful to think of life more that way. So based on the circumstances of something right now, I can pray about something and get an answer that is good for me right now. But tomorrow, my husband can make a choice that changes circumstances. And my answer then may change if I pray again. Does that make sense?
It does. I think it also helps women to know that, because a lot of women are like, well, I need to set a boundary. Like, and my boundary really does need to be separation right now because he's so emotionally abusive that I cannot even be around him. Let's pretend. But then they'll think back to that answer and be like, but I'm supposed to be with him. So instead of saying, okay, I need to set this boundary because I'm not safe, they think God wants me to be abused. And that's not ever going to be the answer. God never wants you to be abused, ever. So if you're trying to sort that out, I'm telling you here, hopefully this is inspiration for you, that God does not want you to be abused, regardless of what answers you've had from prayers in the past.
I agree completely.
For me, I never did get an answer about whether or not I should marry my ex-husband, but I definitely felt like it was the logical right decision. I'm very, very logical. So it seemed like the logical right decision, which I made happily. And now looking back, I don't know if I would have gotten an answer or not, but I can see that my life's work would not be possible without him. Like, he introduced me to everything I needed to know to run BTR and to continue to run BTR. So I'm actually super grateful for the experiences I had, because I would never be able to do what I do now without the experiences that he gave me, which were all horrific. But also, now I have a PhD in evil. Let's talk about how spiritual bypass is problematic for a man exhibiting abusive behaviors.
So my husband, leading up to that second big D-Day, he threw himself into spirituality. He was becoming very involved in our church community, very service oriented. He was reading the scriptures for like a certain amount of time every day. He was on his commutes to work. He was listening to sermons, and he was keeping track in his little calendar journal of acting out points. And he convinced himself that this was all serving him really well, because he was getting longer periods of abstinence between acting out events than he ever had before in his life. He was going like a whole 2 weeks between acting out for a period of months. And he was convincing himself, because he was doing all of these things, that he was really progressing. But did they actually help him to progress? No. He fooled himself into thinking he was making progress, but it was a 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And he was still living in lies and secrecy and abusing me. See, he told himself, no, this is good, because I will tell what's been going on after I've gotten like 6 months or a year of sobriety under my belt, and it will be this like really awesome thing, and she'll be so excited for me. But the thing is, like, he was never going to get to 6 months or a year. He was just bypassing and keeping me stuck in abuse. In about the period of 1 to 2 years post that second D-Day, he was exhibiting another form of spiritual bypass. He was doing all of the right things on paper for recovery. He'd done a formal disclosure. He had gone to a 12-step group, was still going to it. He'd done the repentance process through our ecclesiastical leader. He was doing all of these right things, but that was just it. He thought that he was done. Like, that's all been taken care of. So can we just put a bow on it and lock it up in the closet and never talk about it again? So this is just another example of how he used spiritual bypass. So addicts can even use working recovery, quote unquote, as a form of bypass, where they convince themselves that they're doing so great, but they're really not.
Instead of asking the question, am I emotionally safe? A lot of women are manipulated to ask, is he in recovery? Because that answer can be manipulated to be yes with box checking. So victims are like, well, yeah, he's in recovery because he goes to his weekly 12-step meeting and he's going to therapy every week. The question, is he currently safe, has to be answered by what his character currently is, which seems to be a much safer question for victims to ask than, quote unquote, is he in recovery?
I agree. There is this false hope and a sense of safety, but it's not genuine safety. It's just a feeling of safety that we so desperately want.
I think it's a hope of safety, because if they're attending a 12-step meeting and they're attending therapy, then you're not safe yet, but you're hoping to be safe soon. So instead of setting a boundary immediately and saying, okay, I need to get to safety now and then watch from a safe distance to see if these abusive behaviors stop, you're hoping that they'll stop sometime in the future.
Yeah. When we're in that terrible trauma and we just want relief, it's easy to latch on to the idea of there's like a cure or a fix or a place of arrival. Like, well, once my husband gets to this place, like this many years of recovery or whatever, then we'll be good. This really will be all behind us.
Let's say we're not experiencing abusive behaviors, and because we haven't been experiencing them for some time, he appears to be healthy and safe. But we wouldn't know unless it happened again. And at that point, you could look back and reframe what your current experience is. But until that happens, why not just enjoy the moment? And hopefully, it never happens again, because this period of peace and safety is not a grooming period. It's actually that he's changed his behaviors. I'm always concerned of like these peaceful good times. How do we know if they're another maybe long and maybe better grooming period because he's learned all this therapy speak, so he's able to groom a little bit better than he has been before?
Right, exactly. And so in the same kind of way, when I think about am I safe, it's am I safe now? Am I safe to, say, engage in this conversation? So my question is not, am I safe to recommit to my husband that we're going to be together forever and divorce is never on the table? No, it's am I safe right now to continue engaging in the relationship the way that I am right now?
Yeah, that makes so much more sense. I love that. So let's talk about some other examples that a man exhibiting abusive behaviors may use to manipulate his victim in terms of spiritual bypass. It might be, I used the atonement. Jesus took away my sins. What, you don't believe in Jesus?
Well, that's just spiritual abuse. Why haven't you forgiven yet? Why can't you move on? Why are you being so unchristlike? I mean, it's just straight up spiritual abuse.
They're parading what seems to be their devotion to their religious beliefs as legitimate, but in this case is simply taking the name of God in vain.
Right. Yeah. The day after my last D-Day, I was expressing how much pain I was in. And he looked at me and he said, I cannot tolerate this cruelty, and walked away from me, calling me cruel, suggesting that somehow I'm devoid of compassion. And so I'm falling short of some spiritual standard. Me expressing my pain is actually a good, healthy thing for me to be doing. Doesn't mean I'm not compassionate.
That is a form of gaslighting to say, you telling me how you feel about me abusing you is mean, is absolutely ridiculous. A comic on Facebook said, I'm so sad and depressed about how you're talking about me abusing you.
Yeah. And this can happen with ecclesiastical leaders as well, both for the abuser and the victim. Bishops or pastors who tell men, well, you just need to pray this away. Praying alone is going to work. Or just you need to immerse yourself in the scriptures, and then that will give you strength to overcome this, but not addressing like the underlying like psychological issues that are at play here that need to be addressed.
Reminds me of Luke 18, where the unjust judge says, pray and God will help you. But he actually has the ability to hold the offender accountable in many ways. Instead of holding the offender accountable, perhaps putting him in jail or whatever other options that judge has for that offender, instead of doing that, he tells the victim, pray, God will help you, when he is actually refusing to be that help, shirking his duty as a judge.
He could be the instrument in God's hand to help and is not. So this happens often to victims as well. Like, why haven't you forgiven yet? You just need to forgive.
As if the forgiveness is the problem rather than the ongoing abuse.
Right.
So you're telling a victim to basically tolerate abuse, and that if she doesn't, that she's the problem rather than the abuse.
And that's why we need to separate ourselves to a degree or to several degrees to get a level of safety. But asking someone who is literally living in abuse and being currently and continually harmed to just forgive, as if that's going to make them not be affected by the abuse. My first D-Day and then my second D-Day, while it was a form of bypass that kept me stuck, I can look back on periods or instances where we recognize spiritual bypass. So we can have compassion on ourselves. Like, for example, there are times when we may be feeling just so heavy and we just really want to break. It's just too heavy tonight. It's just too heavy. I'm going to go read my scriptures or say a prayer, ask for God to take this feeling away, listen to some uplifting music, recognizing that's what I'm doing. It's an intentional thing because right now it's just too heavy and I need this comfort. That's not the kind of bypass that's going to keep you stuck.
There's never going to be anything wrong with asking God for comfort and for asking him for peace, right? The only thing is, if you're in an abusive situation, a moment of peace is not going to solve your problem. A moment of comfort isn't going to solve your problem. So you can feel that comfort enough to move forward, to set a boundary, to know what you need to do, and also for a break from the intense emotional pain. I remember I would jump up and down, like when I was praying, and I would scream and yell and be like, why aren't you doing anything about this? Kind of thinking that there would be an instant where he would solve it. Most of the time, I wasn't comforted in the moment, and I just felt terrible. My experience was like, God wasn't even going to give me any moments of peace because maybe he thought I would misinterpret them. So he was like, I'm going to let you be in total pain for a year and a half. And then finally the clouds lifted after I'd been separated from his physical presence for at least a year. Many women do feel a lot of peace, even though the situation is terrible. We don't ever have to think, wait a minute, was that feeling of love real? Because it always is. He wants to comfort us and he wants us to feel his love. All right, so now that we've covered spiritual bypass, let's talk about New Age bypass, which is sort of this, despite your painful current circumstances, all you have to do is think differently.
New Age teachings can go wrong, especially in healing from trauma or if you're in a dangerous situation. There's a lot of victim blaming that can go on in this kind of teaching. What you just said, that we create our own reality, is a form of victim blaming. There is the teaching that everything that we feel or experience originates with our own thoughts, so that we are creating our feelings with our thoughts, that nothing is happening to us from the outside. That can be very victim blaming. And victim blaming is very dangerous because that will make it more difficult for them to find safety and heal. So these are some common things you might hear. It happened for a reason. Nobody can hurt you without your consent. I wonder why you created this experience. It's just your karma. There are no accidents. There are no victims. There are no mistakes. Don't look back. What's done is done. Don't be a victim. Your feelings are an illusion. Be strong.
I see the biggest danger in that is that someone would think, okay, well, if I can just think different thoughts, then my reality will change without actually taking action to keep themselves safe. Have you seen that in your experience?
Yes. Let's hit on this one. We create our own reality. Okay, so we're going to debunk that. Often victims will hear, we create our own reality, so you shouldn't do that. You should not be writing or thinking about something so negative, or else you will draw negative things into your life. The faulty thinking there is that somehow, if our belief is strong enough, if our energy is high enough, like our vibration is high enough, then we will only attract good things, and we can somehow avoid attracting negative things that will bring us down. But that's magical thinking, because we exist within these human systems and these natural systems that we don't have control over everything within those systems. There are other people and forces acting all around us. There's just all kinds of things that we can't control. We can have the most positive thoughts and be kind and take all kinds of precautions for our safety and still be deceived, or still be, victimized in another way.
Or Jedi Masters. You will not look at porn anymore. Oh, I will not look at porn anymore. You will not hurt me anymore. Oh, or thinking, this isn't hurting me when it is hurting you.
Trauma symptoms are not the result of negative thoughts. New Age people think it happens like this. You have a negative thought, it leads to negative feelings and perceptions, which leads to bad things happening. But if I had been more skeptical and thought about negative potential consequences, it can help us to do things that are within our power to help us to stay safe, recognizing that everything is not in our power, but there are some things that we can do to minimize risk.
This would be like, if you feel anger, that's a negative emotion, so you're going to draw more anger to you. An idea like that, rather than realizing anger is a gift to us that can help us take action to keep us safe.
Absolutely. That's at the core, recognizing that we're human, recognizing that like we do have great power within our humanity and within ourselves. There's so much light within us. And if we tap into that, there's so much empowerment there. And that's great. But that we also have limitations in our humanity. And so with spiritual bypass, with this new age bypass especially, there's this real emphasis on we can transcend it. We can transcend the human experience, basically. But that's not the point. We're not meant to transcend the human experience.
When you say transcend, what do you mean? Like, we don't have to experience it? We can be above it?
Basically float above it. Basically get so good at disassociation is what it is. Learning to disassociate and fooling ourselves into believing that's transcendence. That we're beyond pain.
It reminds me of a lunch that I went to with this lady. She was a gratitude coach, I think, something like this. And she wanted to partner with BTR. And at this lunch, she said, well, gratitude is the heart of everything. And if I just have learned that if you can be super grateful, then any experience that you go through is beneficial to you, useful to you. And I was like, that's not going to be helpful for women, because if they're stuck in this abusive situation and all they're trying to do is just be grateful for their situation and what it's teaching them rather than actually getting to safety, that's not going to help them at all. Right. So I told her, like, this would never be a good fit for my audience. Although it's good when you're in trauma to see the things that are actually worth being grateful for. You know, you might want to say, oh, I'm grateful that I have food today. I'm grateful that I don't have to sleep on the street. I'm grateful that I have a blanket that I enjoy. You don't have to say, I'm so grateful to be in this abusive situation.
No, you don't. And in fact, there's power in recognizing that you're not grateful to be in that situation. Exactly. So there is truth in what she's teaching, but trying to apply that broad brush, that's not going to help women who are stuck in an abusive situation or people who've just been victimized. So this gratitude coach you're talking about, this is a really common thing, is this toxic positivity, which is the excessive or ineffective overgeneralization of a happy and optimistic state all the time, denial, minimization, and invalidation of genuine emotional human experience. So that would manifest as hiding what we really feel behind a positive front, dismissing our emotions, feeling guilty for the negative emotions we feel, minimizing other people's experiences, trying to distract them from what they're feeling, encouraging ourselves or others to reframe their experience, which that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes that can be very helpful, but we have to be mindful of timing, and then also shaming others for feeling negative emotions. When I was in serious trauma, like I'd had a major D-Day like a month before, and I was with family and something triggered me. Mind you, I just found out about everything that had been going on in my marriage for 15 years a month before. So something triggers me and I start crying. And I left the room because I was with family. I was with extended family, my parents and a sister and, her family. And it was embarrassing. And I didn't want to make them uncomfortable. So I left the room. But I could not stop crying, just sobbing. And my mom followed me and she said, Tracy, you just need to put a smile on your face for the sake of your children. And that was not helpful. Not only was it not helpful, it was very shaming. I felt, now I'm a bad mom because I'm crying in front of my children. And I had no control over that trigger in that moment. The trauma was too fresh. It was too recent. Also, she told me in the same conversation, You just need to put the past in the past and look to the future.
A month after, you don't know if it really is in the past.
You're still living it. Yeah, I was still not safe. She wanted me to skip healing. She wanted me to pretend that nothing was wrong. Whereas what I really needed was safety and stability. And after I'd found safety and stability, then I need to go through the long, messy process of remembrance and grieving, which is that second stage of healing. And that's a long process. We have to be able to process what has happened. We have to go back to the past, acknowledge it, validate it, feel what we need to feel. And in the process, oftentimes we can learn really great things from it. But if we can't, or if we don't, if that's not part of our process, we shouldn't shame ourselves for it. It takes a very long time, but you can't even really make any progress in that second stage if you haven't found safety and stability first. So it's basically just you're making me uncomfortable with your difficult emotions, so I'm going to tell you to turn them off and pretend that that nothing is wrong.
And move on, right? A lot of people say things like, it's going to be okay. It'll be fine. Things will work out. Like, let's skip right to put on your happy, positive attitude about it and everything will be okay. But if you keep crying, then it's for sure not going to be okay. But that is another way of telling a victim it's her fault.
Exactly. It's more victim blaming. We have this societal intolerance, this cultural intolerance for feelings of helplessness and loss of control, which leads to victim blaming. People who have an inability tolerating their own difficult emotions are not really very capable of tolerating the pain and suffering in others. So they're impatient for us to just move on or just pretend that everything's fine. Victims remind us of our own vulnerability. If she was victimized, then I could be victimized, and that's scary. So I'm going to pretend that she wasn't victimized. She just made a bad choice, or she just put herself in a bad situation. And so if I cannot make that same bad choice or put myself in that situation like she did, then I won't have to feel helpless.
Or that would never happen to me because I've asked the right questions. A lot of women ask all the right questions and they're still victimized.
Victim blaming is a convenient way to avoid taking responsibility for our own actions if we have played a part. So often abusers will do this, or people who have contributed to secondary trauma, exacerbated the trauma. They'll continue to blame the victim because it's a way to avoid taking responsibility for their own part in the victim's pain or injuries. And then also there's self-blame that happens oftentimes where we as victims, desiring a sense of control, blame ourselves because then we're like, well, if I had just done this, if I just done this, I've just done this, then that wouldn't have happened. So if I can change the way that I am or the things that I do going forward, then this won't happen to me again. And we see this oftentimes, I think, in a betrayal trauma community. They're safety-seeking behaviors, essentially. It's, if I am just the perfect wife in all of these different ways, then he won't betray me again.
In some 12-step circles, women are told, you have to keep coming to 12-step meetings for the rest of your life or this will happen to you again.
Yeah. As if doing that has any bearing whatsoever on his choices. Like, it doesn't.
I think it's ironic because they talk out of both sides of their mouth. They'll be like, you have no control over him, but this will happen to you again if you don't keep coming to meetings the rest of your life. I'm like, what? You're saying two opposite things at the same time.
It's just talking out of both sides, and it doesn't make sense. Like, you can't have all of these things be absolutes at the same time.
There's a lot to be said on how you perceive things is going to change your reality. In our case, what we've been perceiving incorrectly is we have been perceiving that we're in a relationship with a really good guy who has a few small problems, rather than the reality that he is an abusive person. Rather than thinking, how can I change my inner thoughts so that I can change reality? I think if victims are most interested in truth, what is the truth? Is it true that these behaviors that I'm witnessing, regardless of how he looks at church, regardless of how good of a provider he is, regardless of this and this, are these behaviors that I'm experiencing abuse?
Yes, exactly. I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I encounter this when well, we just need to have, positive thinking. We just need to change our outlook. I like to remind women that more important than positive thinking is truthful thinking. Because positive thinking, sometimes, while it can be helpful much of the time, sometimes it can keep us in dangerous situations. I know a woman who experienced incredible betrayal trauma. Very, very sad story. And a friend wanted to pass on some of this stuff that she thought would be helpful. Let me help you reframe this experience to just look for the positive, to just imagine the good that can come of this. I'm like, no, that's not going to be helpful. Please, no. That's not what she needs right now. Because I knew enough about her situation that what she needed was safety. She was not safe. Immediately jumping to what are the lessons, or what are the blessings that could come of this, or, well, let's hope for this outcome and just think about that and focus on that and work towards that.
What some people call hopium, this hope that he will change or he can change. When you say work for the outcome that you want, all women that I've talked to, I've never met a woman who doesn't feel this way. Everyone wants a happy, safe marriage. And so women have already been operating on that for years, where they're like, okay, he can change. I will be patient as he changes. I believe in Christ's atonement. So they're saying, I will be patient because I want this positive outcome. Not the worst case scenario, but when it comes to abuse, the worst case scenario is not divorce. You're currently in the worst case scenario, which is abuse, and nothing is going to feel good. There's nothing that's going to feel peaceful. There's nothing that's going to feel right when it comes to abuse. Every effort you make to work towards safety is going to feel like, I don't really want to do this.
Right. Well, it's also painful. Truthful thinking is often painful thinking. The reality of our situations hurts. So it is tempting to minimize the pain of it and pretend it's not as bad as it is.
Yeah, it's really bad. I try to tell people how bad it is, and they don't want to know how bad it is. In talking about these new age things like it's all for the best or there's no coincidences, there might be some overlap with something called post-traumatic growth, although I think post-traumatic growth is something completely different.
It is.
So let's talk about what post-traumatic growth actually is, as opposed to like just thinking, oh, this happened for a reason, there are lessons to be learned. What would post-traumatic growth mean for a victim in an actual, meaningful, useful way?
Post-traumatic growth, first of all, is not an escape. Rather than an escape, it's an embrace of ourselves. It's genuine self-compassion. It's coming out the other side with a new appreciation for life, healthier relationships with others, an optimistic view of new possibilities in life. We feel stronger. We feel genuinely changed.
For me, the post-traumatic growth has helped me feel more vulnerable and more human. It has truly humbled me and broken me to the point where now I feel very like equal to my other fellow humans on this earth. How has that felt for you?
I love what you said about broken. For me, allowing myself to feel as broken as I was, that's a starting place. And then diving into learning to have more compassion for myself and giving myself grace for the things that I'd been through where I had been victimized, and then integrating the story. So it's like I can think back on my story, even the story that I'm in right now still, and not feel ashamed of it, not feel this intense pain about it. It's part of who I am now, and I wouldn't be who I am now if I hadn't been through that. So I'm at peace with it. And then just everything that you said too, this new humility where because I feel so much compassion for myself, it naturally extends out to others. And I just feel a compassion for all of my fellow human beings, whatever struggles they're going through. It's changed my perspectives on almost everything. It affected basically every part of my life.
And I think the post-traumatic growth isn't possible, the growth part with bypass, because bypass doesn't lead to growth.
Bypass leads to a temporary escape. It can feel like we've grown because we feel different temporarily, but our circumstances don't change and things are still acting on us. For me, when the trauma was so bad, realizing I'm broken, like I'm on the floor, helpless, hitting that kind of a low.
What would you say to women who have not yet felt that post-traumatic growth and they're in the middle of the trauma about what their future can look like as they take the time to heal and go through the stages of grief?
For me, my belief is that self-compassion really is just opening ourselves up to feel the love of God. It's feeling a portion of his unmitigated love for us. Surround yourself with safe people who can be patient with you, who can see you up close and personal and not turn away.
Also recognizing that you literally were a victim.
Oh, absolutely.
I think when women realize that they really were a victim, genuinely, that they can grow, but they don't have to go to 12-step for the rest of their lives. There's nothing that they did or can do that would have avoided it. And then learning new skills, learning new things about themselves. This can be a reason to learn and grow more, which can be exciting, but there's no shortcuts to it.
Exactly. And it's not a straight and narrow path. It's a long, winding, loop-de-loop kind of path. I wrote something a couple years after a big D-Day. I put a trigger warning on it, and the trigger warning is positive post. So I'll just read this. When I was in deep trauma, it was very difficult for me to hear overly positive reflections on betrayal trauma from people at the other end of the tunnel. It felt painful and unrealistically optimistic, like I couldn't trust that these women were actually at peace with all that had happened, and I resented that they were not giving justice to the pain they had endured. For me, for hope to feel legitimate, I have to hear and feel how dark it was before. If I just see an after picture, then I doubt the reality of the before picture. I have to see them side by side to fully appreciate and trust the miracle of the healing that has taken place. So that's why I put a trigger warning. Not everyone here knows my story or was witness to the depths of the pain and trauma I have experienced. The hopelessness, fear, confusion, paralysis, anger, loneliness, anxiety, depression, and deep sorrow. I do not ever want to minimize the pain and trauma of anyone by glossing over the struggle and only celebrating the healing. Because the struggle is real and it is hard. And I believe in honoring the moment we are in and the emotions that we are feeling, because doing that is a key part of finding genuine peace and healing. But it's hard to accept and honor where we're at from a place of self-compassion and love if we feel that others are not honoring it with us. So please know that I still hold a place for those of you who are in the depths of the struggle. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to feel whatever you are feeling, and I don't judge you for any of it. I see you and I love you. So after that lengthy disclaimer, I can finally say that I am grateful for my betrayal trauma. I woke up at 5 a.m. after a disturbing dream and couldn't go back to sleep. I was lying in bed and began pondering what I've been through, and I realized that I'm actually grateful for it. I never thought I'd get to this point. I wasn't sure if I ever even wanted to get to this point. But I am here and I am glad. I am grateful for the person I am becoming because of what I've experienced. And I like me. I have learned things and grown in ways I'm not sure I could have without experiencing the trauma of sexual betrayal. Does this mean that I would go back and choose to do this again? I don't know. I'm not sure. Does it mean I would wish for anyone else to be blessed with betrayal trauma? Hell no. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Does it mean that God predestined me to be betrayed by my husband, assigning this trial to me? No, I don't believe that for a second. He hasn't condemned me for missing those warnings. He has loved me and helped me to learn from the experience. And through the experience, I have learned that he wants me to be safe and to know happiness, and I have learned how to trust and rely on him to keep me safe and at peace. And if I miss another warning and fall into darkness again, he will be there to lift me up and guide me back to light and healing. None of the good that has resulted for me through this trauma takes away from the bad. I view them side by side. If I didn't give full validation to the bad, I wouldn't be able to fully appreciate the good. Why would I want to cheat myself of greater joy by glossing over or denying the darkest parts of my journey? I will do my best to honor whatever moment I am in, knowing that things will always be changing, and I am not defined by any one moment. I don't have to feel sad or lonely or angry forever, just as I don't expect to feel happy and positive all the time for the rest of my life either. The beauty is in the flow.
That is so good. That's how so many women feel. Although like what I said with that lady at lunch, being grateful isn't the solution per se. But now that I'm on the other side, I actually do feel grateful. But it wasn't the solution. It's how I feel now that I have space, that I have safety, that I have security, that I've been able to process things from a safe distance. Now I feel grateful.
Right. And I think that the gratitude and the joy that we can feel if we allow it to come naturally as opposed to chasing it is more genuine. That's my experience. That's my experience. It was not helpful for me growing up as a child in a culture, in a family where I was constantly being told that I just needed to choose to be happy, and that I just needed to choose not to let things bother me, and that I just needed to smile more. You know, all of these things, it wasn't helpful. It didn't help me to be a happy kid. And in trauma, when I was legitimately a victim of a terrible thing, it was not helpful at all. It was re-traumatizing, and therefore actually stunted me a little bit until I was able to recognize what was going on and set boundaries around people who were not safe.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So both of us read the book Jesus Feminist by Sarah Bessey. Betrayal Trauma Recovery is a women's empowerment organization. And to me, that's just what the word feminist simply means, that women have equal rights and that we're empowered to be independent and live the lives that we choose, and we're not oppressed or trapped. So let's talk about that book, Jesus Feminist, what you thought, and how the word feminist can help victims sort of overcome spiritual abuse, and the ways that people are trying to get victims to use spiritual bypass or new age bypass, and how we can avoid that, especially because so many women and a lot of men really have a negative reaction to the word feminist for some reason. I haven't quite figured that out. And maybe because of their religious upbringing or their political views. I don't think that it's a political word, but some people do.
Yeah, it's the radical idea that women are humans too. First of all, just my own experience growing up was very much what you just described. It was an absolute aversion to the word, to the point that I never did any due diligence in even learning about it. I just accepted that feminism was a bad thing. I grew up hearing the word feminazi used by people close to me, which is a really derogatory, mean thing to say. Even in my adulthood, when I started opening myself up a little bit to some ideas in feminism, I thought, is there another term we can use? Is there another term? Is there another word we can use? But now I have come to embrace and love the word. I do consider myself a feminist, not just a feminist. I consider myself a radical feminist. Let's see what Sarah Bessey says about it. She says, page 13 of her book, she says, feminism is complicated and it varies for each person, much like Christianity. It's not necessary to subscribe to all the diverse and contrary opinions within feminism to call oneself a feminist. Feminism gained popularity as a result of secular work and scholarship, but the line between sacred and secular is man-made, because God is the source of truth. Christians can still give thanks to God for the good works associated with feminism, such as the gaining of status for women as persons under the law, voting, owning property, and defending themselves in a court of law against domestic violence and rape. As Canadian theologian John D. Stackhouse Jr. says, Christian feminists can celebrate any sort of feminism that brings more justice and human flourishing to the world, no matter who is bringing it, since we recognize the hand of God in all that is good. Modern Christian feminism is alive and well, from social justice movements to seminaries and churches to suburban living rooms worldwide. At the core, feminism simply consists of the radical notion that women are people too.
I was talking with someone about it. They were really uncomfortable about the word feminist. And they said, well, I just don't want it to swing too far. And I said, the pendulum cannot swing too far on equality. Like what? That we always have to keep women a little bit below men? No, it can swing as far as it needs to swing. Currently speaking, women are not believed. Women are not taken seriously when they experience this extreme emotional and psychological abuse and oppression. They are blamed for it. If we talk about our experience, we shouldn't talk about it in that way. If we complain about it, we're complaining about it too much. If we stay silent about it, we were in denial. There's no way right now to appropriately protest it without being blamed in some way.
Right. Because it sounds radical.
Yeah. It sounds extreme, right? Oh, she's using this word abuse. It's not that extreme. And you're like, no, that's actually what it is. And I'm not being extreme. Yeah, the pendulum can't swing far enough as far as I'm concerned. I don't think that it can go too far when it comes to equality. And so until women have the ability to be equally believed, as equally understood, as equally taken seriously, the pendulum has not swung far enough.
I love what Sarah Bessey says. She names one of her chapters, Jesus Made a Feminist Out of Me. And I'm like, me too. Me too. This was part of the transformation, the post-traumatic growth. It was tapping into this truth that society had been suppressing in me for most of my life leading up to that point. She also talks about that moment on page 111. She's talking about a difficult experience for herself, which had to do with pregnancy, but for me, it was betrayal trauma. And she says, but the truth remains, regardless of the circumstances unique to us, the voice of God has a habit of breaking through the noise of our lives, giving us a turning point so that we mark the rest of our lives differently from that moment on. When we talk about these moments in our lives, we begin our stories with the words, and then everything changed. And that was betrayal trauma. And I'm a feminist now. Jesus made a feminist out of me. That was a natural result of healing in my life.
For women who are uncomfortable with this word feminist, I want you to think about why. I want you to consider the gaslighting that has taken place that would say feminists are bad. Who is telling you feminists are bad? What is that about? Because I think if you really think about it, you'll realize this gaslighting effect by society in general and also men in general to try and say, no, women cannot be equal to men.
It's because it's a disruption of the status quo. It infringes on power structures as they are. It's a threat to patriarchy. I agree, though, with Sarah when she says patriarchy is not God's dream for humanity. It took me a while to come to that. For a while, even after I was beginning to embrace feminism, I still was like, but is there a way that to make it work within patriarchy? Is there a way that patriarchy is still the right way? And we just have to tweak this or tweak that? And ultimately, no. I believe that patriarchy is a result of the fall. That's not how God intended for men and women to interact with each other.
And when you say patriarchy,
the hierarchy, yeah. Men are in charge legally. They make the laws, spiritually or religiously rather. And they're the organizers of the structure of society. And for most of human history, women really didn't have much power. I mean, they weren't counted as you were saying before, as human. You're literally treated as property. You can't vote. You have no say in how the laws are actually written that affect you. It results in a terrible, terrible experience for women and girls. But I would say that it's not healthy for boys and men either. It's not what God intended. It also sets these really strict, defined gender roles. I don't think that they're helpful to men either. Even though I believe they are a creation of men, I don't think that that's even very helpful for them. It's comfortable for them because it was made to be more comfortable for them, but it's still not the way that God intended it.
So you've got the class that's in charge, men, and they're able to define these roles. And so they want to define the situation that is the most comfortable for them, not for other people. And so they're telling women, well, you would be most comfortable if you acted like this and if you did this, rather than letting the women have a voice. The most logical way of doing it, let's say in a partnership with a husband and wife, would be, okay, we're going to get married. Let's sit down and talk about each of our talents. what are the things we really enjoy and what are the things we're good at? So I might say, I'm really good at yard work. I'm excellent at gardening. I love being outdoors. I'm not so good at cooking and organizing food. That's just not one of my talents. It's also not something I'm super interested in, right? And then he would say, okay, these are the things that I like. I also like being outdoors. I also like doing yard work. Great, we can do that together. And I also don't like cooking. At that point where there's this thing that's like, we both don't like cooking, then the answer is not, well, you're the girl, so you have to do it. Right? The answer to that is, interesting. Neither of us really like it that much. How are we going to manage these household tasks that need to be done? The other thing that I've been thinking of a lot lately, you can work and be a mom. I'm not saying that you should. A lot of women really would prefer to stay at home. We want to protect women's ability to choose the kind of life that they want. And if you're talking about household tasks, a lot of people are capable of holding a job and being a parent and taking a shower and doing their laundry and eating. So this idea that there's this thing that women must do, basic household tasks like laundry and cooking and cleaning and stuff like that, because a human isn't capable of doing basic self-care things and having talents and exploring their talents and doing anything else is ridiculous. But everyone should be free to be able to explore their own talents and what they're good at and what they're interested in, and also be able to do regular household tasks. A person's mission in life should not just be just basic household tasks that everyone needs to know how to do.
Right. And if both the husband and the wife approached marriage in that way, approached life in that way, then they could work that out together and form some kind of equilibrium. But forcing people into these very specific gendered roles, like there are plenty of men who don't feel comfortable being shoehorned in that way either.
Yeah, they don't know how to fix the air conditioner. And so what do? You call an AC guy to come and fix your air conditioner. But then to say to a woman, well, you're a woman, and so you should be forced to cook. It's like, no, you're not forcing me to fix the air conditioner. So what can we do to work this out? There are so many other options if we're willing to accept that God created each of us as individuals with talents to do his work. He hasn't just said, all women, I created you with one job, domestic labor. Sorry, it's your only option.
Right. She has these traditional household duties. Once you move beyond when her children are young and at home, women talk about feeling empty. Like, where's my purpose anymore? How sad is that?
My mom, she's only worked outside of the home for a very short amount of time, but she's very handy. Like, she knows how to tile, and she's a kitchen designer, and she does electrical and plumbing and all kinds of things. And she remodeled our house a ton, and she's helping me remodel my house right now. In fact, that is what the construction you can hear in the background, if you've heard any of it, is my mom is out hammering and finishing my basement right now. So has she fulfilled her own dreams and talents and things that she's interested in? She's super interested in construction. She loves it. Is she the best person at making dinner every night? No, that's not one of her talents, but that doesn't make her a bad mom. She's an excellent, amazing mom, and she loves construction. And I'm really grateful that even if she didn't work in the construction industry, that she's been able to explore her talents, even not working outside the home. So I'm not trying to say that women have to do it in a certain way or a way that they feel uncomfortable with, but having a man look at you and say, well, you have to clean the toilet because you're a woman, that's your job, is crazy.
It is.
It can be anyone's job.
Yeah, she talks a lot about this in chapter 6, patron saints, spiritual midwives, and biblical womanhood. Biblical, in quotes, womanhood. She says, the phenomenon of being a stay-at-home mother is relatively new and unique to the prosperous, right along with daycares to provide childcare. It's a mark of our privilege to be able to decide or to make adjustments to our household budget to keep one parent at home full-time with the children. I believe that it is a worthy pursuit, good work, holy work. I hope so. It's my own daily work, but it's not the same thing as biblical womanhood, is it? If the title can't be enjoyed by a woman in Haiti or even by the woman hailed in Scripture the same way it can by a middle-class woman in Canada, then biblical womanhood must be more than this.
From your experience, what do you feel like is biblical womanhood after studying this?
It's coming to an intimate relationship with God, with Christ, and standing in my own truth, honoring my own spiritual path. I love the example that she gives of Mary in the story of Mary and Martha. I had never read this story like this before, but first of all, Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus as a pupil. This is on page 19. She says the daughters had never had that spot. Even after Martha tried to remind her of her duties and responsibilities to their guests, Jesus defended her right to learn as his disciple. He honored her choice as the better one and said, it will not be taken away from her. And what is she doing right there but defying gender roles and cultural standards? And Christ is honoring and encouraging her in that. So I never understood the story that way, because in the church culture that I grew up in, it was very much, no, to be a woman, to be a good woman, you do it this way. You fit this role. You think this way, you feel this way. And to get out of that is, well, then you're not being the right kind of woman anymore. One more example is she talks about Mary, the mother of Jesus, on page 17. She is quoting Rachel Held Evans here. But she says her worthiness is in her obedience not to a man, not to a culture, not even to a cause or a religion, but to the creative work of a God who lifts up the humble and fills the hungry with good things.
This is similar to a spiritual bypass and New Age bypass. Religion and society tell women, as a strong woman, you should be able to bypass painful things.
Right.
If you're a real, true, righteous woman, then your husband wouldn't be looking at porn because your prayers would be powerful enough and he wouldn't want to do that. Enough faith in Jesus, you can create miracles in your family. There's this intersection here between bypass and feminism.
That actually reminds me of benevolent patriarchy, which is what exists in my church organization. We're going to put women on a pedestal. We're going to talk them up. We're going to talk about how wonderful they are, how spiritual they are, how incredible they are, how they are more inclined to righteousness than men are. They don't have to work as hard for it. It just comes more naturally to them. But we don't actually want to hear what they have to say. We don't actually want their unique experiences, because if their unique experiences contradict what we're saying their experience should be, they're not valuable anymore.
They're more spiritual and they're better, but they can't be trusted to lead.
Exactly. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It's very much as long as you're falling in line and holding up this system, then your voice is very valuable, and we will give you a pulpit and we will let you speak and we will applaud you because it's coming from the mouth of a woman and she's so spiritual. But if that same woman says, well, this is my experience and this is what God is teaching me, but it contradicts a little bit the status quo or infringes on the comfort of men, then suddenly her voice is not valuable anymore. Suddenly her access to the Spirit must be impinged.
Wonky. She's gone off the deep end. She's a little cray-cray. When women get labeled crazy or they've gone too far, usually it's when they're saying something that is right in line with church doctrine. So, for example, they're complaining that they're being abused and that no one is holding the abuser accountable. That is something that is totally in line with most churches. Most churches say they do not tolerate abuse. They will not stand for abuse. Most societal people say that, right? Abuse is wrong. But then they'll be like, well, this woman is kind of making this up, or she's being too loud, or she's talking about it in a way that's not the right way. It's like, but what I'm saying is exactly in line with what you profess to believe.
Stepping outside of the church for a minute, just into a secular place, that reminds me, we had the first wave feminists with, the suffragettes getting the right to vote. Then we had the second wave feminists in the 60s and 70s. And then we had, the third wave feminists a few decades later. But the second wave, who refer to themselves as the radical feminists, and that's who actually I identify with more, we're really just saying, look, we want to hold men to the same standard that we've been held to all along. All we want is to say, men, you need to live up to the same standard. It wasn't, we think men are awful. It was, we expect more of you. And when men resisted that, when society resisted that and labeled the feminists as a problem, as too extreme, as asking too much.
Yeah. So I want to encourage women who are listening to start getting informed about feminist issues and consider that just best thing you can do for women is getting yourself to safety and security. On that note, I want to talk about women in the workforce for a second. So a lot of women, when they have to get divorced or they're considering like a job or something, a lot of women think, okay, well, I want to be a therapist, or they think, well, I'll work at the library or I'll work at the school or something that sort of fits with how can I be a mom? And I just want to give a shout out to women who are considering like, how can you become more independent or use your talents better or whatever it is that you feel like you need to do. There are so many needs for women in politics or in policing or in law, like becoming lawyers, becoming judges. I really want women to open their minds to like, you can do anything and you can help the world in so many different ways. You can have a real grown up career as an attorney or as a doctor, as an architect, whatever it is. Just because you're a woman doesn't mean that you need to take a low wage job.
I agree. I mean, we see more women in these fields than we used to, which is good. I'm happy for that. But even still, like, I mean, I'm not even 40. As a kid, I had all those kinds of ambitions. I remember wanting to be a doctor. I remember wanting to be a lawyer. I remember wanting to be a teacher. I remember wanting to be an architect, like all these things you named. And I wanted to be a writer. But when it came down to it, as I got older, it's like I forgot about all of that. Because at my core, I believed that I couldn't. There was a limitation there. And it was because of the way it was talked about, and it was the way it was modeled for me. I was very much encouraged to go to college and to get an education, and I appreciate that I was able to do that. But still, the way it was talked about, I felt great limitation. I was told, yes, you need to go to college and you need to get a degree so that you can get a job in case your husband gets hit by a truck someday. That's literally what I was told. It wasn't so that
you can fill the measure of your creation.
Exactly. It was always a backup plan. Like I had all these ambitions, and yet I felt these limitations that made it very difficult to actually pursue any of that. And I ended up just doing what my culture told me to do, which was get married really young. I barely graduated from college before my first baby was born, and didn't really get any real work experience. So although I have a degree, it's sad. I feel embarrassed even talking about it because it feels like a worthless piece of paper to me because I've never really used it. And I have no serious career work experience. I've had little jobs here and there, but I was not set up to think about my life in terms of, oh, yes, I could pursue a career because that could be a fulfilling thing for me. And beyond that, so many women in our community, for sure, feel so trapped. It's just another layer to add to all of the difficulty of their situations, because it's difficult to see a way out when they have been financially dependent for so many years, and then a time comes where they need a way out, they want a way out, and they feel so helpless. There are opportunities, and I love when women figure it out, but it adds so much more difficulty. It has so much more difficulty in getting out.
Like, let's say now at 40, you decided you would go to law school. You could do that, right? But then you're like 15 years behind the man who went to law school at 25. So that's what makes it difficult, but that doesn't make it impossible. And that's what I want to tell women is that you might think that you have lost your chance to do that thing that you really feel like in your heart you always wanted to do. It could be that you wanted to be a painter, literally like paint people's houses, not like an artist. It could be that you wanted to run a yard care business. I don't know, whatever it is that you really enjoyed that you wanted to do, it is not too late. Will you be behind your male counterparts who started when they were 25? Yeah. But I want women to know that if they start now with whatever it is they wanted to do, if they want to go to med school and they'd finally graduate when they were 60, They could still be a doctor for 20 years from when they're 60 to 80, you know? There's always options. And I want women to like realize that it's not too late for you.
I see women go through the struggle because it's a struggle, but then I see them do it. It's incredible to see. Also, it sets a wonderful example for your children.
Yeah. Now, that being said, so many women want to stay at home, and I honor that choice as well. I remember when I had my son and I was thinking about going back to work because at the time my husband didn't have a job and I was the one that could get a job easier at that time. It was during the economic downturn in 2008. My son was nursing. And so just the thought of leaving him to go to work horrified me. And I did not want to do that. So I do want to honor women who are like, no, I need to be with my children. This is what I need to do. Because those things are really important, and supporting women in their choices and what they feel like they need to do in their lives is our aim here at BTR, is just to support and validate and encourage and just be there for you. Regardless of what you choose, we care about you and love you and validate you and want you to do what's right for you, whatever that is.
Yes. Just another reminder for women who are unfamiliar or a little uncomfortable with the idea of feminism, that feminism is not a niche. It's not a small or a catch-all. They're not all cut from the same cloth. You don't have to align yourself politically with a particular brand of feminism to call yourself a feminist. There are pro-life feminists, you know, if that's an issue for some women. Yeah, just don't be afraid of the word. There's no shame in the word.
As we embrace the term feminist, it can mean many different things to many different people. But the cool thing is you can define your own type of feminism. You can define the way that you would like to promote equal rights for yourself in your own life and also for women throughout the world. This podcast, more than anything, is for women's empowerment to help women come out of the fog of emotional and psychological abuse and sexual coercion and be able to live lives of peace and safety. That is what women deserve. If this podcast is helpful to you, please help us reach other women by following or subscribing and giving us a 5-star rating. Thank you for helping other women find us. If you've already purchased a copy of my book, Trauma Mama, Husband Drama, please circle back and give it a 5-star rating. A lot of women are searching for books about betrayal trauma on Amazon, and rating Trauma Mama will help them find this podcast, which is free to everyone. Your donations keep this podcast going. Go to our website, btr.org, scroll to the bottom, click on Support the BTR Podcast. And until next week, stay safe out there.